What's up, guys? Welcome back. We are back for Katson's Corner Season 3. I know it's been a little while since you guys have seen me. I've been busy with some other stuff, but we are ready to start talking about the draft again. Fitting that it comes the week after a loss, because I know after a 3-0 start, you guys probably don't want to talk too much about the draft anyway. But I think now we have pretty readily identified the holes on the Chargers roster. There's certainly been a lot of discourse about it this week. So I figured now was as good a time as any to come back and start talking about what's going to be happening in the 2026 NFL draft. We will do this mostly every week for the rest of the cycle, as you guys may be familiar from the last couple of years. As you may have known, I was in Brazil for the week 1 game. That's where my hat is from. And so I've been busy with stuff like that, busy with some other personal projects and stuff. But very glad to be back with you guys talking about the draft. We're going to go through a quick 6-pack today, 3 interior offensive linemen and 3 edge rushers that I think the Chargers could consider relatively early in the 2026 NFL draft based on the way the first month of college football season has gone. Before we do that, make sure you guys do all the YouTube stuff as normal. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, turn the notifications on so you know when Steven, Tyler, Alex, and I are all live doing stuff. We've been doing a ton of stuff this year, and I'm really proud of the stuff that we've been making. So I hope you guys have enjoyed. And, I hope we can keep the vibes relatively good for the rest of the season. I know last week was a tough loss for sure, but optimistic about what things are going to look like this Sunday and going forward for the rest of the season. But as always, we are here to talk about the draft, and we are going to do so by talking about Auburn center Connor Lew. If you guys are in the Guilty as Charged Discord, I think you guys probably knew that this guy was coming. I have been talking about him for a little while now. I really, really like Connor Lew. He is my center 1 coming into the season. After a month of a season, not much has changed on that front. He's 6'3", 300 pounds. Last year, Auburn had a 63.5% run success rate and a 18 or so percent chunk play rate, excuse me, when running behind Lew, which was both of those are the highest in the country for FBS interior offensive linemen. You guys may have seen the graph that was floating around Twitter the other day about EPA by run gaps in the NFL. And the Chargers are green, 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 green. And then you get to the 2 A gaps and it's real bright red, which means that they have really struggled running the ball up the middle this season. I'm sure all of you have plenty of opinions about why that is, with the way that Bradley Bozeman is playing. But I think that those stats from 2024 with Connor Lew really illustrate like what kind of guy you are getting on in the ground game if you draft him. He is someone that before the season, I had scouting buddies of mine tell me that they thought that he was a top 15 player, like just overall talent. Not necessarily was going to go top 15 because he is a pure center. And guys like that tend to fall a little bit. If you think about like a Tyler Linderbaum type guy with the Ravens a few years ago, ended up falling towards the back end of the first round just because like he was a pure center, even though he was a top 10, top 15 talent in that draft. Could see a similar thing with Lew. He had a really strong week 1. It's been a little bit up and down since then. The rest of that Auburn offensive line is really bad. I really don't like any of the other players on that offensive line. So there is a little bit of an aspect of like how much of it is Connor Lew versus how much of it is kind of the supporting cast around him is not really putting him in positions to succeed. But it's been a little bit up and down. I think also part of that has to do with the fact that Auburn's quarterback is holding the ball for far too long. And so hoping to see a change there, whether it's a different quarterback or whether they just get some quick game going or something. But Lew overall is a really great player. He's a really high-end mental processor. I think it's very obvious from watching his tape that he is very, very well versed in pass rush games, stunts, twists, blitzes. Like he's picking all that stuff up for the entire offensive line. He does that at a really high level. I think that that's something that the Chargers are really going to value because right now Bradley Bozeman is doing a lot of those calls at the line for the Chargers. Justin Herbert doesn't really have as much of that stuff on his plate. It's mostly Bozeman. And so if you're going to bring in a new center, you have to either offload that responsibility onto Justin Herbert, which I think is possible, but I don't think that the Chargers really want to do very much. just from a preference standpoint. Like, I don't think that it's because they don't believe that he can do it. I think it's just that they don't want him to have to do it, in addition to everything else he's already doing for the offense. And so you need to find somebody that, in addition to being an elevation once the ball is snapped over what Bradley Bozeman is providing you right now, is also an elevation over what Bradley Bozeman is providing you pre-snap. And I get that right now the popular thing to do is to pile on the way that Bozeman has played, but the fact of the matter is that he's a veteran center in the NFL. I don't think that he's as bad as the PFF grades have made him out to be. He's certainly not my favorite center in the league, but there's a lot of stuff that he's doing pre-snap that is getting the Chargers offense into positions to succeed as a unit, that you would need a new center, whether it's a rookie or a different free agent player, to also be able to do at that level. And I think that Lou has that ability. He does it at Auburn with, like I said, pretty bad talent around him on the rest of that offensive line. So I feel pretty good about him in that respect. He's also the only interior offensive lineman between guard or center that got a day two grade or better from the spring scouting services. He had a second round grade, I believe it was, from one of the services. Nobody else in the country, guard or center, had better than a fourth round grade. Kind of depending on how you interpret some of the scales with some of the different things. But the way that I interpret it, it is yeah, Connor Lew, and then kind of head and shoulders above the rest of the class. I think the only thing that maybe gives you some pause here is like he's not really the kind of like super physical finisher of an offensive lineman as some of the other guys in this class, or some of the other guys that we've seen Jim Harbaugh and Joe Ortiz kind of gravitate towards in their first year and a half on the job. And so maybe there's a consideration there of like, is he really a Harbaugh type player? There's going to be that conversation. But at the end of the day, like, I think that he's the best center in the draft by a pretty wide margin. We'll talk about one guy that I think is getting closing that gap a little bit in a second here. But I think right now he's still my center one by a pretty wide margin. He hasn't really done anything to knock me off that position. Like I said, it's been a little bit rough the last couple of weeks. The Oklahoma game in particular was pretty rough, but Oklahoma also has one of the best defensive lines in the country. I think that their defensive tackle, David Stone, is going to be like a top 5 player next year. And so losing to him on a couple of reps is not something that I'm like overly concerned about from Lou's perspective. But like I said, some of that physicality stuff of just like he's not necessarily like as much of a finisher as some of these other guys, may come into play. And then also, as well as um, you have to take a pure center in the first round. And the Chargers need a pure center. And so they shouldn't have any qualms about doing that necessarily. And they come from, their front office comes from an organization that has taken a pure center in the first round before, but also everything is a player by player, case by case thing. We can't say that just because the Ravens took Tyler Linderbaum when Joe Ortiz was there, they're going to be fine with taking a first round center only prospect this time around. And so there may be some consideration of like, you want that guy to be a little bit more flexible. You want that guy to be able to play a couple more positions, or if he is going to be a center only, you want him to be more physical. You want him to be more of a finisher, whatever it may be. Flipping over to the defensive side of the ball, this is how we're going to do this today. We'll do an interior offensive lineman, and then an edge rusher, and then an interior offensive lineman, and et cetera, until we get through our 6. Joshua Josephs from Tennessee is a guy that popped off the tape week 1 for me, had a huge game against Syracuse, basically just destroyed everything that Syracuse wanted to do on offense in that game. I think he ended up with 7 tackles, something like 3 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, or something like that. Like, just an absolute monster game. He's only 6'2", 237, which is pretty small for an edge rusher, especially for a Chargers profile edge rusher, where they want a little bit more of a power profile from those guys. You see that in the way that the body types are built in this Chargers edge rusher room right now with Thule and Bud Dupree. Khalil Mack is built that way as well, more like in like the 6'4", 260-ish range. But Josephs is a really physical run defender despite that kind of smaller stature, which I think is something where if you want to add a little bit more dynamicism, you want to add a little bit more juice off the edge for this Chargers pass rush room, which is something I think they need. But you still want that run defense because that's a huge part of what this defense is built around. then you kind of gravitate towards a player more like Joseph's, who has that explosiveness off the ball, but is also still able to defend the run at a pretty high level for being a lighter player. You see the Eagles do this all the time. Like Nolan Smith is a really good run defender despite being a little bit smaller. And so like players like that kind of in that mold, I think makes sense for the Chargers still, even though they may be a little bit smaller size wise, like pure size wise, than some of the guys that they already have in the room. Josephs, I think, has a really good speed to power profile. That's a profile that I think is becoming more popular in the NFL over the last like year or 2 years, because you look at guys like Jared Verse that are coming into the league now, and you have to have that power profile in order to win. One of my coworkers at the media company that I own, Wide Left, if you guys are not familiar, but one of my coworkers, James Foster, wrote a really good piece over the summer about how pass rush bags, quote unquote bags, are not necessarily actually that important for winning pass rush reps in the NFL. And really, a lot of what it comes down to is just like you have to be able to win with power in the NFL. You have to just be stronger than the guy across from you a lot of the time. And if you can do that, and you can do that at a consistent level, then you can build the rest of your game around that. But if you don't have that, there are going to be certain limitations to your game. I think Josephs has a really nice speed to power profile that shows that he is able to hold up against NFL level competition. He was graded in the second tier of this edge class over the spring. So the first tier is kind of like guys like Ruben Bain, TJ Parker, Keldrick Falk is up there. And then that next tier is really wide open. You have guys like David Bailey, LT Overton is up there still as kind of like a tweener type guy over the spring. Josephs is up there. There's a few other names that are kind of in that mix, and kind of that day two conversation over spring grades. But Josephs is someone that I think could play himself into the first round. There's a lot of people that thought he was a better player than James Pierce was last year at Tennessee. James Pierce obviously ended up becoming a first round pick. And so if he's a better player than Pierce was, there's not really a reason why Joseph shouldn't go in the first round, also by that logic. But I do think like if you're going to be concerned about him, the main thing is just like, does he have the counter moves? He doesn't really have a plan if he can't win with power. And because he is smaller, I think that the translation of his power is a little bit more of a question than some of these bigger edge rushers that win with power at the college level that we'll talk about. Because when you're only 240 pounds and you're going up against, NFL caliber tackles week in and week out, you have to still be able to win with that power, and if you can't, you have to have a counter off of it. You have to have a plan off of it still. Kind of what I talked about with like you still have to be building your game around that power profile. And I think right now Josephs is still in the process of working through all of that. And so, nobody is ever a complete player coming out of the draft. It's very, very rare that you get a guy that's like ready made out of the box. But I do think that that is kind of the point of concern with Josephs right now, in addition to just like he just may not be the size archetype that the Chargers like. But like I said, the run defense reps I think are really encouraging. It's a lot like Donovan Azaraku last year that I told you guys about really early on in the season, where he's a little bit smaller, but I was like, you know what, this guy's a heck of a run defender. I really don't care about how big he is. Like I still think that like he's going to be a good player. Um, he's gotten off to a little bit of a slow start with the Cowboys, but also the Cowboys ecosystem right now is kind of a mess. So, we'll have to see what that looks like. But I think Josephs is a good player. I think right now I'd probably still have him in that kind of like early day two conversation. But certainly if he pops a couple more times against some of this SEC competition that they have down the stretch, I think that you will certainly start to hear about him in sort of like the top 50 conversation pretty soon. Let's move back to the offensive side of the ball. Iapani Laloulu, I'm going to butcher that. I'm just going to call him Poncho for the rest of this segment because that's what he goes by. Um, we'll learn how to pronounce his name later down the line because also he's a true junior, so there's not even a guarantee that he's going to declare. But Poncho is really the only guy in this center class that I think is closing the gap to Connor Liu. I know everybody is a huge fan of Jake Slaughter at Florida. I am not the biggest fan of him. We won't get into that too much because I don't like to talk too negatively about guys with so much the season left to go. But I wasn't a huge fan over the summer. I think the NFL is also not really a huge fan based on the spring grades that I got on him. And so I don't think that he's in that conversation right now. He can certainly work his way up into there, but I don't think he's there right now. Poncho is really the only guy that I think is competing with Lou right now, and it's really because he's looked so good through the first 4 or 5 weeks of the college football season. Obviously, that huge Oregon Penn State game that happened last weekend, uh, he there's a handful of reps where he's just throwing Zane Durant out of the club. Zane Durant, the Penn State defensive tackle. And Durant is a good player. Like, I like Zane Durant. I thought he should have come out last year. I thought like he was a, second, third round pick, was still someone that I had circled as like, this is a good player. I'm excited about what he looks like this season. And you go back and you watch the Oregon Penn State trench film, and Poncho is just throwing him all over the place in these run reps and completely stonewalling him in pass protection and completely shutting him down. And you're like, okay, this is a real player for sure. Super dense build at 6'2", 325, but he still moves pretty well for that size. He looks a lot bigger than he is on film, but moves really well for being that big. He's only allowed 15 pressures and 868 pass protection snaps over 3 seasons at Oregon, which is 1.7% of his snaps. So if you're worried about the pass protection on the interior, like, this is how you fix that. You take Poncho, you play him at center. Super advanced processor at the line. I can't recall exactly who it was that tweeted it out, but I know Braden Fajoko was talking about him a little bit after the Penn State game ended, so maybe he's the one that tweeted out the videos. But there's so many reps of Poncho pointing out all the protections, pointing out the mic, doing all of the stuff at the line, IDing all of the blitzes and the stunts, and everything that's coming from Penn State's front, and getting that Oregon offensive line where they need to be so that they can win those blocks. And really, when Oregon didn't win those blocks, it was just their guys getting out talented. I think Isaiah World struggled a little bit against deny Dennis Sutton, but like that was just Dennis Sutton like out athleting World. It wasn't about like he wasn't in the right position to succeed. And that starts with Poncho. Poncho is the one making all of those calls. And so again, like we talked about with Lou, if you're going to bring in a new center, that guy has to be able to make those calls, because I don't think the Chargers want Justin Herbert to be the one doing that. Maybe he'll do some of it, especially if you have a rookie center, but I don't think they want him to be doing all of it. And so you have to have a guy who's comfortable with that. Poncho, Connor Liu are very clearly comfortable with doing that stuff at the college level. Obviously, it's a translation to be that comfortable at the NFL level, but I think they've both shown they have the capacity for that, and that's a really important thing for me, especially looking at like pure center prospects. The only thing with Poncho that's going to keep him from getting into like the very tippy top of the conversation draft wise is that he's not really the greatest athlete. I think he's an average athlete. Length is a little bit below average, so he is going to be kind of a center only guy again. I think he's probably sub 33-inch arms if I had to guess, maybe even shorter than that. So probably going to be a center only prospect. Like I said, he's not a great athlete. He's kind of an awkward puller sometimes. And so, you don't really want to get him outside the phone booth too much. So he's not going to be a fit for everybody. But I think he's a great fit for the Chargers. He's a great fit for kind of the inside gap scheme sort of stuff. And so I think he's someone that definitely should be on your guys' radar for the rest of the season if he hasn't been already. Moving on to our second edge rusher, we're going to stay on the West Coast with USC's Anthony Lucas, 6'5", 279, so a lot closer to that profile of guys that the Chargers like in that edge room as sort of a run defense forward type defender. That really fits the Chargers style. You can see, again, like we talked about when we were talking about Joseph's, this Chargers edge rusher room is built around crushing the pocket, not necessarily beating you to the corner, right? Like Khalil Mack and Tuli are both capable of beating you to a corner, but really what they're trying to do is contain the pocket and crush that pocket from the outside in, so that you contain all of these mobile quarterbacks. And the job that they do with that is obviously inconsistent a little bit week to week, but that's the goal, right? And Bud Dupree is the same kind of style of pass rusher. Caleb Murphy is a little bit of a changeup, but like for the most part, he's the same kind of style of guy. Even the guys that they have on the practice squad, the guys that they've kept, like Garmin Randolph is 6'7", and like has 36-inch arms. And so he's just long arming people into the quarterback every time that he's getting out there. And so Lucas definitely fits that. It's more of a run defense focused thing. He's going to play the run first and then play the pass. He's 280 pounds, so he's really stout on the edge out there. Former five-star recruit, so he's a athlete. He's a get off the bus type of player. Really, really pops off tape with power and explosiveness. Again, that power profile is something that I think is going to become really important for draft evaluations of edge rushers over the next year or two, just with the way that the NFL is going. And also, like, as we start to see this shift towards heavier personnel and more teams are using fullbacks again, and teams are trying to get creative in the run game, like, you need those bigger, stouter edge rushers in order to stop the run first, right? Like, football is cyclical. We're getting back into that cycle where running the ball is an important part of the game. He has a kind of weird body type is the only kind of thing that I'm confused about with him. His wingspan is 84 and a quarter, which is like 93rd percentile or something like that. But his arms are only 33 and 3/8 inches, which is like sub 50th percentile, which basically just means that he has a really wide chest, but he's not super long for being 6'5". And so, that's going to maybe present some problems at the NFL level. I do think that like he's probably strong enough of a player that it doesn't really matter, but it's just a weird body type that like I kind of need to see more of him to kind of like get a better feel for how it's going to translate, because I can't really think of anybody that has that sort of frame to them. And then also like he just needs to finish a healthy season. If he plays this Saturday, which I assume he will, as long as USC has a game, I suppose, he is going to set a new career record for snaps played in a season. And this is his junior season. And it's going to be like 232 snaps would be the most that he's ever played. He was a rotational guy at Texas A&M as a freshman. He transferred to USC last year, and then he got hurt after 6 games playing a rotational role. And so like he's already set a new career record in pressures in like 4 or 5 games for USC. So he's on track to do that, but like you need to see him finish a healthy season before you feel comfortable taking him highly. But he's someone that Jordan Reed has pointed out as a riser through the first month of the season as well. I'm really excited to see how he kind of performs the rest of the season. I hope he stays healthy. There's a lot of good Big Ten matchups on the rest of their schedule, and so excited to revisit him a little bit over the next month or two here before we get into All-Star season. Let's move back to the offensive line. We're going to go back to Penn State, Oregon, and talk about Olaivavega Ioane. This one I did practice before the show, but also I know about Ioane because, as some of you guys may know, I live in Washington, and Ioane is from Washington. He was actually committed to the University of Washington, who I cover, before he flipped to Penn State a couple of years ago. He was a class of 2023 guy. So it was the year before I was on the beat, but I was still following it. I still knew about him. And we were very, very upset to lose him to Penn State because Washington was very optimistic about the kind of player he was going to be. But with the coaching staff change, he decided to go to Penn State instead. 6'4", 334. So again, pretty densely built guy. Really, really huge mauler in the run game, but also has been a lot more consistent in pass protection this year. I've really been happy with what I've seen from him as a pass protector because, like, the run game stuff is going to pop when you have a guy that big and that athletic. He was in the top tier of guards in the spring grades. I think he was the third overall graded guard, but those guys were separated by like maybe 1 or 2 points, I think, as kind of like upper day 3 guys, like getting into like sort of late third round range. You have to remember that like these spring grades, almost nobody has a first round spring grade. And so like if you have a third round spring grade, like you're probably still like a top 50, 75 overall player. Super powerful hands. He has the ability to make some reach blocks. He is a really good athlete in that sense for how big he is. Can kind of, make some of those plays. His hands are a little bit late sometimes. I want to see him improve with that a little bit. But when he does get a hold of you, like you're not getting away from him. He can play left guard or right guard. He's played all five positions on the line. They've moved him around a ton. Penn State's offense is also really funky. So like him playing some tackle is not necessarily like an actual tackle rep. I mean, like Tyler Warren was playing center for them on some reps so that he could like catch a touchdown out of a trick play look. So a little bit of that is muddy, but he has technically played all five spots on the offensive line. I think that you probably want to keep him at guard because he does have the length to do it, but he could maybe play center if you really wanted him to. Um, the only reason that I'm hesitant about playing him at center is that he's still developing as a blitz recognizer. He's a little bit late to get around to blitzers, to stunts, to stuff like that. But one of my good friends in the draft space, Sam Teets, who does really great work over on his Substack, he did a summer profile of Ioane, and his scheme fit was left guard in an inside zone or gap scheme. And guess which team runs a whole lot of gap in the NFL and has a left guard who is set for free agency, who has kind of disappointed as a first round pick? That's right. It's the Chargers. So, if left guard is a hole that they're going to be looking to fill, I think Ioane certainly fits that bill. And so, someone to keep an eye on as the season goes on as well. And then closing out here, we're going to talk about Texas Tech edge Romello height, 6'3", 240. So again, a little bit on the smaller side in terms of like what the Chargers are looking for. Probably would be more of a DPR style guy for the Chargers specifically. Um, Not really a super strong, like super great run defender, but he is just so productive as a pass rusher that I think it's foolish to overlook him as an overall player, just because like he's been so productive this season. He has 17 pressures already, almost halfway to his 2024 total of 32. He is a sixth-year player. He spent last year at Georgia Tech. He was at Auburn before that. He was at USC before that. So 2 years at USC, 2 years at Auburn, 1 year at Georgia Tech, and now his final year at Texas Tech. So he is an older guy. So, getting all those pressures and everything, racking all that stuff up, it is sort of like, well, you're also like, you know, 22, 23, 24 years old against 19, 20, 21-year olds. Still, obviously more common now that like guys are closer to his age, but still kind of like, all right, like you're kind of beating up on guys who like your recruiting class is already in the NFL. You should probably be beating up on guys in the NFL, but you're beating up on kids that are a couple years younger than you. Did have a really big game against Utah though. I thought he really put Caleb Lomu in a rough spot. I think Caleb Lomu does not want that film to get out. I don't think because Romello Height really had him in the blender for most of that game. He's a name that's generating a lot of buzz with scouts. Another one of my really good friends, Corey Kinnan, who runs Adapt on Draft Substack, which is the pinnacle of NFL draft content right now, especially in the early part of the year where most other national people are not doing draft stuff. He has a ton of scouting friends. I know a lot of them as well, so I can vouch for the fact that like they are real and he knows what he's talking about. But he's been saying that like the name that he's been hearing most about is Romello Height. And you think about like in this edge class, right? We talked about TJ Parker, Keldrick Falk, Ruben Bain, David Bailey is on the other side of Height at Texas Tech. And Height is still the guy that like you're hearing the most about when scouts are going on these road trips to go visit players. So that means something for sure. Um, Again, like he's a 6 year guy. He doesn't necessarily have that power profile that we've been talking about that like I think is going to be really important at edge rushers, especially for the Chargers. I think it's going to be really important. Doesn't necessarily have that. So like maybe he's not the biggest Chargers fit, but also like if you get into the third round and you haven't taken an edge rusher for some reason because like let's say you take an interior offensive lineman with your first or second round pick and then like I don't know, people are still mocking defensive tackles and corners and things like that to the Chargers early. So like let's say they fall in love with a corner or something and they take him first or second round, they take an interior offensive lineman with that other pick. And then you get to the third round and you still haven't addressed edge rusher and like that maybe at that point that you're getting another year out of Khalil Mack or something like that, or you've extended Thule or something like that, or you've signed someone in free agency to a 1 year deal as kind of a mercenary contract. And so you really just need a DPR. I think it still makes sense to take a chance on height because, like I said, he's been so productive. Scouts are enamored with him. It sounds like he's had a really good game against really, really good competition. I mean, everyone thinks that Caleb Lomu is like one of the top tackles in the class, and so that doesn't. None of that means nothing. All of it means something, right? And so I think with players like that, sometimes you have to just like look beyond the thresholds that you think a team might be operating under, because sometimes it really is just like, okay, but he's good. Like sometimes it really is that simple. Sometimes it is just like, that boy is nice. I want to draft him. And so I think Romello Height is someone to definitely continue keeping an eye on. I mean, in general, for the Chargers, like you should be watching pretty much every Texas Tech game, I think, because they have Romello Height, they have David Bailey, they have a couple of really nice defensive tackles. They have a linebacker that people like, Jacob Rodriguez. Like, there's a lot of talent on that Texas Tech team, especially on defense. And so, like, if you're looking for edge rushers specifically, like you can just watch Romello Height and David Bailey probably every week, and like that will give you a pretty good idea of like the second tier and the third tier of edge rushers in this class, because I think that Bailey is probably a second tier guy and Height is probably like the top of that third tier. So like that'll give you a good idea of what we're looking at here. That's going to close the show today, guys. Hope you enjoyed the triumphant return of Katson's Corner for this season. I will be back next week to talk about some more guys. Let me know who's stuck out to you the first month of the college football season. I'm definitely still working through my list of guys. I've been watching fewer college football games than normal for me, just because I have been on the beat with Washington this season, as well as some other responsibilities and stuff that I've had this year. But all of that is possible because you guys support this show and support all the other work that I do. If you want to see some of that other work, you can follow me on Twitter over at Alex Katson, the same way you see it spelled on the screen. But otherwise, I will see you guys next week for another episode of Katson Corner. Bolt up.